the heat and enjoying yourself. We decided to escape the heat this weekend, actually, and we went up on the mountain. I got an invitation from Dom Munson here, and so Dom said, "Hey, let's go backpacking." Now, okay, first thing, if a former Division I track star, long distance runner invites you to go backpacking, think twice. Just think twice. Just think it through. I was like, yeah, this sounds great. I'm thinking like camp, just relax, eat some chips and stuff. Like, no, that's Dom's the one in the yellow shirt in the back. He's the one laughing at us there, right there. And so, anyway, it was Dom, and then you got James there, and then you got Michael O'Kine, who's a PhD student in chemistry, and he's helping us with our water purification up there. We had such a good time. Here's the thing: it's really, you got to stay hydrated, right? I mean, it's hot up there, even though it's not as hot as down here. It was like upper 80s probably during the day. And guess what? It hasn't rained all summer, so we ran out of water. And typically, we went through the wilderness of rocks, right? And so there's always been a stream that runs right through there. The stream's not running. Ain't no water there. So we're looking around, we're scrambling. It's like middle of the day on Saturday, and we'd already hiked like close to 4 miles that day. And we're like getting a little thirsty. And all there is just like this little, I wouldn't call it a puddle. It was a little more than a puddle, but it's like that heavy duty kind of tea-colored water with water skippers going across it, and then kind of an oily film over the top of it. And so we put our bottles right in there, and Michael's like, "Oh, this doesn't look good." And when the chemistry PhD student says it doesn't look good, it's not good. So we filled up. Luckily, we had some iodine tests. We didn't die. We were drinking. James and I said, "Okay, I better drink it first." So I drank it, and I said, "I feel okay," and I don't feel anything. And then Michael goes, "You don't feel anything yet." And so we had is there another picture? I think we got one more picture it was gorgeous. That's Tucson there in the background. We just had such a blast. But Dom, at first he goes, "We're only going to go 17 miles." We're like, "Oh yeah." And James was like, 17? Luckily, he cut it down. He only made us go 12 miles over it's like, oh my gosh. Anyway, we had a great time. If you can get outside, go up to Mount Lemmon. It is beautiful. We had a great, great time. We made a memory for sure. We're going through a series on the book of Genesis. And if this is your first time visiting, it is awesome to have you here. And so don't worry if you've missed the first 30 chapters. There is still a lot to talk about in the book of Genesis. It's a huge book. Okay, there's lots of scriptures left. So don't worry, I feel like I've missed them all. Don't worry, we're going to cover it. So we're going to take a look at Jacob fleeing from Laban. And what's happened here up until now is that Jacob is a shyster. Okay, he's a guy that has a lot of work left to do in his character. So he runs away because he's tricked his brother, he's tricked his dad, and he's run away because he's afraid his brother's going to kill him. But he runs right from the frying pan into the fire to go to his Uncle Laban. Spends 20 years with Uncle Laban. Uncle Laban is even trickier than Jacob is, if that's possible. And so finally he's like, I got to get out of here. This is just too much. I want to leave with my wives and all my kids. And so we're going to go ahead and start in chapter 31, starting in verse 1. Now, this is a long chapter, so the print might be too small on the screen. I mean, it's just going to be tough. So if you want to follow along in your phone, just turn over to Genesis 31. It might be easier for you to read, just simply because there's quite a few scriptures we're going to be looking at. So we're going to start reading here in verse 1. Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, "Jacob has taken everything our father owned and has gained all his wealth from what belonged to our father." And Jacob noticed that Laban's attitude toward him was not what it had been. Then the Lord said to Jacob, "Go back to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I'll be with you." So Jacob sent word to Rachel and Leah to come out to the fields where his flocks were. He said to them, I see that your father's attitude toward me is not what it was before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I've worked for your father with all my strength. Yet your father has cheated me by changing my wages 10 times. However, God has not allowed him to harm me. If he said, the speckled ones will be your wages, then all the flocks gave birth to speckled young. And if he said, the streaked ones will be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked young. So God has taken away your father's livestock and has given them to me. Then he goes on, he says, in breeding season I once had a dream in which I looked up and saw that the male goats mating with a flock were streaked, speckled, or spotted. The angel of the Lord said to me in the dream, Jacob, I answered, here I am. And he said, look up and see, all the male goats mating with a flock, they're streaked, speckled, or spotted, for I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now leave this land at once and go back to your native land. Then Rachel and Leah replied, do we still have any share in the inheritance of our father's estate? Does he not regard us as foreigners? Not only has he sold us, but he's used up what was paid for us. Surely all the wealth that God took away from our father belongs to us and our children. So do whatever God has told you. Then Jacob put his children and his wives on camels, and he drove all his livestock ahead of him, along with all the goods he'd accumulated in Paddan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. When Laban had gone to shear his sheep, Rachel stole her father's household goods. Moreover, Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him he was running away. So he fled with all he had, crossed the Euphrates River, and headed for the hill country of Gilead. So 20 years after arriving, God calls Jacob to leave. Laban had used up all the inheritance and had none to give to his daughters or grandchildren. His attitude was dramatically different. In chapter 31, verse 5, it says, Jacob, he compares your father, Laban, with the God of my father. He says, your dad, he cheated me, changed my wages like 10 times. Only reason why I have what I have is because the God of my father was looking out after me. That's the only reason. If God were not with me, I would have nothing leaving here, if I were even alive. And so one thing that you see in this passage here is that God sees and God remembers. Remember, Jacob took that oath? Remember the stairway to heaven we read about a few chapters ago? God refers back to that and he says, I remember that. I remember the oath you took. I've seen everything that's happened to you. I'm taking care of you. You know, it's important to know that God sees you. He sees what's happening in your life right now. And he also remembers the promises he's made to you to look out after you. Sometimes we feel like, where's God? But God sees. He remembers. He says, I remember you when you got baptized. When you said Jesus is Lord, I'm still here with you. I still got you. Absolutely, I still have you. Jacob had tried to leave 6 years earlier, but it wasn't God's timing. He wanted to take off. At that time, he didn't have a lot of wealth. He just had his wives, 4 wives, and his children. He wanted to take off, but it was not God's timing. God said, no, wait, hold on a second. He doesn't say it, but he doesn't allow him to go at that point in time. He waits 6 more years, and then at that time he leaves with incredible wealth. His flocks multiply. Of course, wealth was measured in the amount of flocks he had at that time. He had the family, but not the wealth that God wanted to give him. This first section deals a lot with understanding God's calling, understanding the timing of when God is calling you to do something. And for many of us, it's hard to know when it's really God's timing and whether it means changing jobs. Hey, maybe I should try ministry. Maybe I should go here. Maybe I'll think about doing missionary work. Maybe I want to try leading for the first time. Maybe I can lead a small group this fall. Maybe it's time to do this. Maybe it's time to move closer to family. There are all these, so many decisions that we wrestle with. And if you're a Christian, if you're a disciple of Jesus, all of a sudden you're taking into account, is this God's will for my life? And it can be pretty challenging because you go, I want to stay in God's will. I don't want to do something that's totally counter to what God's will is for my life. We've got people in here who are planning on going overseas, and that issue of what is God's will here and what is his timing? Sometimes we jump the gun and we run ahead of God. But then sometimes we drag our feet when God is clearly calling us to do something. We just go, I know he wants me to do it, but I'm not going to do it. Neither one is a good option. What's God calling you to do right now? I talk to Christians all the time, and they go, I really have felt for a long time I should be doing X. I've really thought for a long time I should try Y. And I'm just sitting there going, great idea. That's a fantastic idea. Why aren't you doing anything about it? And I hear, then 3 years will pass, or 5. I've been here like 11 years. I've seen a lot of you for a number of years. And I go, didn't you say the same thing in 2016? I think I heard this. Yeah, I've really been thinking about doing this. I'm like, going, okay. You better start thinking about when is God's timing. If you felt called then, how come you're not doing it now? How come you're not even working toward it? How come you're not even putting in your push-ups, your spiritual push-ups toward it? You're not even getting, if you're thinking about changing jobs, you're not even going to school for it. You're not getting ready. But you bring it up. Yeah, I feel like God's really calling. Oh, he is he? If he's calling you to do something, you better do it. I think about a guy named Felipe Moraes. He was working in Philadelphia, young man, and he felt called by God to do self-supporting ministry. He wanted to work, and he also wanted to do ministry work. He wanted to maybe lead a church someday. So a friend of his in Brazil said, hey, you should read this book on how to plant and grow a church. It's by a guy named Rob Skinner. And so he goes, okay. So he reads the book, and then he calls me. And he says, hey, you don't know me, but my name's Felipe. I said, say again, what's that word? Felipe. I'm like, okay, Felipe, say it slow. Okay, I got it now. And he goes, I read your book. It was recommended to me. I'd like to do self-supporting ministry at some point in the future. And I said, well, why don't you move here? And I'll train you. And he said, okay, let me think about that. And so about a month later, I follow up with him, and he goes, I've decided to move to Tucson. This was during COVID. It was not an easy, it was spring of 2020. And so he moves here in the summer of 2020, and when he moves here, we're all buttoned down, right? We're not even meeting in church. We're meeting in my home. We're meeting in our living room. We've got a small group here, small groups scattered all over the place. And he moves here, and we start talking, and guess who's in that small group? My daughter, Anne. And I could just tell by Felipe's look, I'm like, oh no. Something's going to happen here. And so Felipe came. He was just fired up, wanted to grow. It was the right timing for him, and then he ended up marrying my daughter. And he's still got that dream. He wants he got his degree to become a nurse so he could support himself while he did professional ministry, or non-professional ministry, I guess, self-supporting ministry. But I think about the example of he felt called to it. He read a book about it. He got advice. He left his situation there that was comfortable in spite of a pandemic, moved here, and God blessed him because God was with him. And sometimes we have an urge, we have a sense like God's calling me to do something, but guess what? There's always barriers. There's always problems associated with that. And you can either be a person that says, I know God's calling me, but there's too many barriers. Or you can say, how can I do this? What needs to happen for me? He went forward with it. He didn't know that by moving here, he'd not only get his dream of getting trained, but he'd end up with a wife. But God blessed him. And I want to ask you, listen, what's holding you back? Just like Jacob, he was called. God appeared to him and said, it's time to go back. And he said, okay, yeah, I'm going now. 6 years before that, it wasn't the right timing. He jumped the gun. He said, I want to go back. God didn't approve of it at that time. But right now, what are you doing to get ready to listen to God's voice? Don't be premature, but when it's time, you got to listen. Okay, we're going to keep moving here. Love in all circumstances. On the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. Taking his relatives with him, he pursued Jacob for 7 days and caught up with him in the hill country of Gilead. Then God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream at night and said to him, "Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad." Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country of Gilead when Laban overtook him, and Laban and his relatives camped there too. Then Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done? You've deceived me and you've carried off my daughters like captives in war. Why'd you run off secretly and deceive me? Why didn't you tell me so I could send you away with joy and singing to the music of timbrels and harps? You didn't even let me kiss my grandchildren or my daughters goodbye. You've done a foolish thing. I had the power to harm you, but last night the God of your father said to me, 'Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad.' Now you've gone off because you long to return to your father's household. But why'd you steal my gods?" Jacob answered Laban, "I was afraid, because I thought you would take your daughters away from me by force. But if you find anyone who's taken your gods, that person shall not live. In the presence of our relatives, see for yourself whether there's anything of yours here with me, and if so, take it." Now Jacob didn't know that Rachel had stolen the gods. So Laban went into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the tent of the 2 female servants, but he found nothing. After he came out of Leah's tent, he entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them inside her camel's saddle and was sitting on them. Laban searched through everything in the tent but found nothing. Rachel said to her father, "Don't be angry, my lord, just that I cannot stand up in your presence. I'm having my period." So he searched but could not find the household gods. Jacob was angry and took Laban to task. "What is my crime?" he asked Laban. "How have I wronged you that you hunt me down? Now that you've searched through all my goods, what have you found that belongs to your household? Put it here in front of your relatives and mine. Let them judge between the two of us. I've been with you for 20 years now. Your sheep and goats have not miscarried, nor have I eaten rams from your flocks. I didn't bring you animals torn by wild beasts. I bore the loss myself. And you demanded payment from me for whatever was stolen by day or night. This was my situation. The heat consumed me in the daytime, the cold at night, and sleep fled from my eyes. It was like this for the 20 years I was in your household. I worked for you for 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flocks, and you changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been with me, you would surely have sent me away empty-handed. But God has seen my hardship and the toil of my hands, and last night he rebuked you." This is an awesome confrontation here between Jacob and Laban. Laban was very friendly and loving at times in the past. It's a very interesting character. When things were good, when Jacob was there and the blessing of God was on everything that Jacob touched, he could be very friendly. He could be very polite, very kind. He could be pious in his appearance. But when the situation changed, because when Jacob went there, it was just Jacob, just a poor man staying with a rich uncle. But gradually over the course of 20 years, it totally changed. And the poor man became rich, and the rich man became relatively poor. And when that happened, Laban changed, and his true nature got revealed. It shows that his piety towards God, his care and concern of people, was conditioned upon his circumstances, and especially how his finances were doing. Laban's financial success affected his love for his family, his own ethics, his faith, and his character. And so when he comes out, he's mad when he finds out Jacob has taken off. He's run away. And he just jumps on the camels. He tells his kids, he said, let's go. Tells all his sons, we're going after him. He's got violence on his mind. He's like, I'm going to kill that kid. I'm going to kill Jacob. It's inferred there because God has to step in there and say, you better not even touch him. You don't say anything to him, good or bad. I mean, it really scared him. Basically, God put a restraining order on Laban and said, don't touch him. Don't say anything, good or bad. And so that caught Laban up short. He's like, oh, better rethink this. Jacob understands that the fear of Isaac has put a barrier between him and Laban. And then what's kind of interesting, back in verse 35, maybe if you can turn there, Christy, Laban is upset because he's lost his gods. He's like, hey, you stole my gods. Well, Rachel, I don't know why she did this. She steals the gods, hides them under the camel's saddle. Okay, let's just do a little sidebar here. Let's talk about this. If your gods can get lost, you've got the wrong God. Okay, if your gods are in the mud, like you can lose them somehow. Rethink what you're worshiping. Okay, well, what are some of the things that you can lose? You can lose money. If money's your God, guess what? You can lose it, and probably will at some point, right? Don't make that your God. How about a relationship? Can you lose a relationship? Oh yeah. Don't make that your God. If you have to go looking for a relationship, that's not a good God to worship. You can lose power. I've been studying out the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. I should have thought about that before I dug into that book. It's about 7 books long. It's a massive tome, but it's essentially the foolishness of seeking power. Just how foolish it is. Everyone thinks they're going to be the next Alexander the Great. Then they end up getting betrayed and killed. You can lose power. You can lose a job. You can lose feelings. Anyone like to feel happy? Yeah, I do. But if you worship feeling good, you can lose that too. Or you can search for a feeling chemically, getting high, depending on drugs or alcohol to give you the feeling that you want. If your God isn't searching for you, you've got the wrong God. That's the difference between the true God and the false gods that we pursue. Because so often we're losing things and we're thinking, I need this. But if you're looking for it, it's not God. The real God is the God who looks for it. Think about the Garden of Eden. Who was looking for who? God was looking for his lost kids. He's like, hey, where are you? That's the 3rd chapter of the Bible. The true God looking for you. You know, God is looking for you right now. You might be going, what am I doing in church? I feel uncomfortable. I feel awkward. Guess what? God's been looking for you. And he's like, boom, got you just where I want you. Found you. I've been looking for you. You haven't been looking for him, but guess what? He's been looking for you since before you were born. That's the true God. That's the God you should really think about, learning about, and following. Now let's go back. I just want to say, let's just finish this out. Jesus is the God who came to seek and to save the lost. He's looking for you. And that's really awesome to think about. Okay, let's go back to Laban. Laban was very shifty in his character, but what you see there is he's a very fair-weather disciple of God. He could mouth the words, the God of Isaac. He could use those spiritual phrases, but when things got tough, his true nature got revealed. And it turned out that he was just a very greedy, avaricious old man. When you face trials of many kinds, James chapter 1, 2 through 4, how do you face it? Are you still the same person you were before? We've gone through a big trial in the pandemic, haven't we? From 2020 to just about last year. I want to ask you, are you the same Christian you were in 2019? Are you strong, as strong as you were then? Guess what? We've got some disciples in here that are a shadow of what you were pre-pandemic. Why? Because you got hit economically. And you had to hustle because of finances, jobs, this situation. But your faith got exposed. Your trust in God got revealed. And all of a sudden you just pulled back. Whoa, hold on a second. I don't know. I just got to take care of myself. I got to take care of me. And that strong disciple that you appeared to be before the pandemic, that's a distant memory. That's just what you used to be, or at least what you used to appear to be. I want to call you, don't be like Laban. Laban, when tough times hit, he just got nasty. He just started playing dirty. Instead, don't be a fair weather disciple. Don't quit. Don't lose heart. You got to dig deeper. One of the things that I loved in high school, I actually hated, was wrestling. I was on the wrestling team. And this is an admission. I mean, I got cut from the basketball team. I got cut from the baseball team. And I know there's some like natural athletes in here that are just like, like, yeah, you don't look like an athlete. You're right. Not much of an athlete. Found that out yesterday. But anyway, there was a team that allowed me to join because they're so desperate. The wrestling team. So I'm like, yeah, I'm on the wrestling team. People are like, oh, it's unfortunate for you. No one ever showed up to watch me wrestle, including my parents, maybe one time. Anyway, but there's one thing that I got from it, is the ability to hang on. I mean, when you're a freshman, you wrestle, and there's 3 periods of a minute and a half, like 90 seconds. That doesn't sound like much, but it feels like eternity when you're on your back and you're trying not to get pinned. I mean, and it just taught me how to hang in there. And I think that's really proven fruitful, to stick with it. And that's why God says, when you're going through trials, consider it pure joy. It says, let perseverance finish its work so you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. We've seen people walk away. But I want to ask you, are you that type of a person? Or are you a person that loves under all circumstances? If you've backed off, it's time to step forward in faith. To be the person that you were when you got baptized, when you were 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 40 years ago, or however long you've been a disciple. At least live up to what you've already attained. And don't become a post-COVID disciple with small dreams and small passion for Christ. That's no way to live. It's time to live big for Christ. Third point, set boundaries. Genesis 31. In verse 40, let's see here. Yes, 43. Laban answered Jacob, the women are my daughters, the children are my children, and the flocks are my flocks. All you see is mine. Yet what can I do today about these daughters of mine or about the children they have borne? Come now, let's make a covenant, you and I, and let it serve as a witness between us. This is Laban speaking. So at this point, Laban knows he's beat. He's not going to get him back, but he's just like, listen, everything I have right here, this is all mine. But anyway, whatever, you guys take off. He's basically given up at this point. But he says, let's make a post. Let's set up something here between us. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. He said to his relatives, gather some stones. So they took stones and piled them in a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, and Jacob called it Galeed. Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me today. That's why it was called Galeed. It was also called Mizpah, because he said, may the Lord keep watch between you and me when we're away from each other. If you mistreat my daughters, or if you take any wives besides my daughters, even though no one is with us, remember that God is a witness between you and me. Laban also said to Jacob, here's this heap, and here's this pillar I've set up between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness, that I will not go past this heap to your side to harm you, and that you will not go past this heap and pillar to my side to harm me. May the God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us." So Jacob took an oath in the name of the fear of his father Isaac. He offered a sacrifice there in the hill country and invited his relatives to a meal. After they had eaten, they spent the night there. Early the next morning, Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. Then he left and returned home. So Laban, he basically resorts to an agreement. He sets up a boundary. And at this point, the roles reverse. Even though he come with an aggressive stance, he's going to attack Jacob. He realizes, I actually have I need to protect myself from this guy because God's on this guy's side. And so he says, let's set up a boundary. Let's set up a barrier so that you won't come on this side and I won't go on that side. So they set up this agreement. And Jacob does it, and he gives him the silent treatment. Jacob tells all of his relatives, all right, let's set up these rocks. He ignores Laban from that time forward. He's like, I don't want to have anything to do with this guy any longer. And they establish this boundary between them, like a pillar or mound of rocks. And then they have a fellowship meal together. And that effectively ends the relationship. Now, had Laban not chased him, this wouldn't have even happened. It wouldn't have been necessary. It wasn't like Jacob was going to come back to his uncle. There wasn't anything to come back to. But they set this up. What can we draw from this section? There are times when you need to establish boundaries in your relationships. That you need to set up barriers between you and toxic people. Raise your hand if you've ever met a toxic person. Where you just go, I don't know what this person's deal is. I got to stay away from him. And that is actually biblical, and it's good practice. Even though Laban is a shifty guy, what he does here and what he suggests is actually a really good thing. Setting up a boundary and saying, listen, we just need to be apart from each other. Now, Jacob had already learned that lesson. That's why he's running away. He didn't need a barrier to understand, I got to get away from this guy. But it just kind of visualize what he's trying to accomplish here. There are toxic people in your personal life, and there can be toxic people in the church. I know, it's like a shocker. Like, really? I thought everyone is perfect in the church. Okay, well, can be always a few, okay? And that's exactly what Jesus talks about. And it's funny how much this whole concept of boundaries is talked about in the Bible. Let's take a look at a few scriptures about this. Look what Jesus says. He's talking here about when people sin against you. When people do things that hurt your feelings or affect you some way negatively, that's wrong. Jesus says, if they still refuse to listen, he says, first of all, go talk to that person directly. Don't gossip about it. Don't go tell her and then her and her, this person's bad, don't be friends with that person. No, go talk to the person directly and say, listen, what you did there is wrong. And then go tell a couple other people if they won't listen to that. And then he says, go tell the church. He says, if they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. Jesus says, listen, if a person is toxic, if a person is sinning against you, you go talk to them directly. You don't make a relationship triangle, you go deal with it. Then you get someone else to help you if they're not listening to you. If they don't listen to them, you tell the entire church. Then if they won't listen to the church, you treat that person as a non-member. Now, it doesn't mean you're mean to them, laugh at them, like, ooh, I don't like you anymore. No, you just treat them as you would a person on the street. Like when you go to the post office, do you treat that person mean at the counter? No, you just go, hey, how's your day? Fine, good, how you doing? It's that kind of a relationship. It's not deep, it's just very superficial. Look at what Paul says in Titus 3. Warn a divisive person once and then warn them a second time. After that, have nothing to do with them. Again, boundaries. But now I'm writing to you that you must not associate with anyone who claims to be a brother or sister in the church, that's what he's talking about here, but is sexually immoral, greedy, an idolater, slanderer, a drunkard, or swindler. Do not even eat with such people. Boundaries. He says, listen, if you know someone who's living a life of sin, you set a boundary. You don't have anything to do with that person. Now, does that mean like every person who struggles with sin, ooh, no way, I don't, you'd have to leave church and leave this planet. But if you know of a person who's deliberately sinning without repenting, doesn't care, you just got to set up a boundary. Let's look at a few more. I appeal to you, brothers, to watch out for those who cause divisions and create obstacles contrary to the doctrine that you've been taught. Avoid them. For such persons do not serve our Lord Christ, but their own appetites, and by smooth talk and flattery they deceive the hearts of the naive. Now this is the character of Laban. Smooth talk. Shifty. He says, listen, avoid them. Set up a boundary. And then he says, if anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not take them into your house or welcome them. Anyone who welcomes them shares in their wicked work. That's 2 John chapter 1, 9 through 11. There are so many other passages, and I would strongly recommend that you read through these. Because there are situations in your life that you're going to face with regularity. People on your staff, at work, in church, in your family, that are impacting you negatively. And you know it. They probably pop up in your mind all the time. Just wrong. You can't change them. And this is the mistake we make. If I'm nice enough, if I go along with them enough, they're going to somehow change into the person I want them to be. Only God can change that person. And if they choose to change. Here's where we hesitate in setting up boundaries. We feel like, oh, I don't want to be mean. I don't want to be bad. I don't want to be hurtful. I don't want to do anything that's going to hurt their feelings. And that shifty person knows that. They're like, oh, you're hurting me. You're traumatizing me. Oh my gosh, you're such a bad person. You're not a bad person. You're a person of conviction who's setting up a boundary. And that boundary may be the only thing that ultimately helps that person to change. When they realize you won't put up with it anymore. You aren't being mean. It's like this. Let's imagine you have a nice little house with a little yard in the front, little grassy yard. You're not in Tucson. It's a nice little grassy yard, the sprinkler going like this, and you've got a white picket fence out in the front, and you got a little dog playing, you got a golden retriever. It's woof, woof. And that person comes along, and he says, hey, Joe, how you doing? And you walk out. You walk out to your little cobblestone steps, and you go to the gate. And he says, hey, can I come in? You say, Joe, it's great to see you. Not today. We can talk here at the fence, at the boundary. We can chat, but you can't come into my house. You can't even come into the yard. That's my boundary. Does that mean you're mean to that person? Absolutely not. But you're not letting him into your life. And that's the boundaries sometimes we need to have towards the people who affect us negatively. What am I talking about? Alcoholics. Maybe you got a family member who's a serious problem with alcohol. Oh, come on, drink with me tonight. Or drug users. Maybe people with money issues. Always going on the next deal. Hey, come on, let's go in together on this. You're like, I don't think that's a good idea. Ungodly lifestyle choices. They want you to take part in it. How about crazy makers? You ever met a crazy maker? A crazy maker is a person that is typically the life of the party. Funny, friendly, gregarious, everyone loves them. Their life's a total mess. Just always asking for money, always messed up. And they make you ask the question, am I crazy? This doesn't seem right. but maybe I'm the one who's crazy. That's a crazy maker. They gaslight you and get you to think you're the one with a problem. Listen, set up a boundary. Stop letting that person into your front yard. Divisive people that are constantly criticizing you, your faith, your beliefs, other people in the church. That says very clearly, set up a boundary there. That person, some of us, we've got friends that are so negative, and we're like, I gotta be friends with them, I gotta spend time with them, I gotta love up on them. Yes. Meet them at the gate. They're outside. You can talk to them, no problem. But you don't let them into your life. Just like, hey, that's my boundary. I don't want that in my life. I don't want that negativity spilling over into my marriage, my family. That's not me. People steering you away from God, set up a boundary. Is there someone in your life right now? I want you to think about this. Is there someone in your life right now who's toxic? Now, I mean toxic, not just like annoying, because that's a lot of us. Okay, there's a lot of annoying. We're all annoying at different times. That's not toxic. That's just like, oh my gosh. Okay, here he comes. Yay! Okay, that doesn't mean that person can't come in your life. Okay, but I'm talking about toxic, like really not helpful at all. If this person's unwilling to change, they're entitled, and they're trying to change you and conform you into their crazy life, then you know that person's toxic. You gotta stay away. Oftentimes, the best thing, the most loving thing you can do for that person is set up a boundary. You have to do this when you become a Christian. You got to say, listen, I don't do that anymore. I had to do that with my friends. I lost some friends. I just said, hey, that was my life. It's not my life anymore. And I lost some friends that way. Don't spend time together. You don't have to hang out together. Don't have them over. Don't hang out. Oh, but Rob, listen. Are you going to live a godly life or not? Set up a boundary. If you're constantly griping like, this person is really messing up my life, the most loving thing you do is set up a boundary. Let me just close out with some next steps here. First of all, wait for and act on God's call. Some of you, God has been calling you to do something, but you've been hesitating. When God calls you, do it. Take action. Take the first step. Start moving in that direction. Secondly, be consistent in your faith and love for God and people. If you aren't the person you were pre-COVID, it's time to change. It's time to say, I'm going to be consistent in my faith in season and out of season. Good times and bad times. Money or no money. I don't care. And finally, set boundaries with toxic people. Thank you so much for listening today. I just want to ask you one final thing. If you enjoyed the service today, we're trying to let people know about where our church is at. This is a Google Maps review. And so you can just scan it, just give a review. If you like the service today, please just say, hey, I liked it, I'd come here again or whatever. Just give us a review, and that helps other people to find it and to be able to hear the gospel. Let's go ahead and close in a prayer, then we're going to sing one final song. Heavenly Father, thank you so much that you